Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns. Those Anti-Federalists proving again this week that they absolutely got it right. And this is Tom Navulis, your host, and I am very delighted that you are back here with me and that we will look into those mirrors of history in such a way that we're even going to see President Trump kind of drop in on the convention of '87, especially to hear a speech which in actuality someone else gave for Benjamin Franklin because of his age and how he was feeling. So he wrote this speech out, and it deals with the executive in so many different ways. But before we get to that, I do want to touch on a couple of other issues, if I may, a little bit of a follow-up from last week in that, folks, we have to be paying attention to what is going on locally. Remember, as I finished off last week, Sam Adams, he was very, very clear that all politics is local. And it is very, very important that we participate. Another area that you know that I constantly speak about is that believers need to understand their responsibility as those that live in a dual kingdom environment. Yes, I guess for those that are rooftop Christians, meaning those that are always looking to escape the planet by staying on their rooftops based on their eschatology, then they still have to live in the world, you folks that have that form of end-time belief. For those that are more of the Reformed nature, that have that Puritan Reformed, Presbyterian Reformed belief, especially if you're not a liberal Presbyterian, then I would ask you to definitely get involved, because the eschatology of the Puritans and Reformers was exactly that of a dual world, dual citizenship involvement. So, gee whiz, I think that that's what we really have to look at, especially if you go back and you look at the information that I put in just from the Pew reports that I gave you to look at last week. Those Pew reports, when we see what's happening in the various denominations, and we see that the various denominations are accepting evil, tolerating evil, where we should never do that. We should be standing strong on our principles. And if you want to just look at the earthly principles, if you will, we have to go back to those foundational principles and the founders still talking about needing a moral and virtuous society to have our Constitution. So as I reflect on that, and as I was preparing for this week's program, I wanted to take a real hard leap into sedition. I really wanted to look at that a lot. But everybody gets freaked out when you take and you mention sedition. Number one, they don't understand the definition. Number two, they don't understand how it is in the U.S. Code. Number three, right away they start going crazy about what happened with John Adams and the Sedition Act and how that pointed to various things. And oh no, we can't do that. We can't do that. We can't bring people up on sedition. Well, it's amazing to me that in the means and mechanisms of our enemy doing three great ventures. And I call them a venture because they have been moving through time. They have been taking that path. They have been educating themselves. And this is what I tell you, is the reason that Obama was at the University of Chicago was so that he would have full access to the anti-federalist papers, all of them, in a manner that he would be able to use them. And Olinsky and all of the other Chicago maniacs, although we know they're really communists, that they would know how to inflict damage on our Constitution because of the warnings that the Anti-Federalists gave in the Anti-Federalist Papers. So the first journey, the first venture, if you will, would be to take and destroy the Christian framework within the country, which includes then ultimately the framework of the family. In doing so, we saw that through an idea of theology, which I mentioned several weeks ago, as we look at this whole idea of political theology, what religion will step in and replace that idea and theology of Christianity. The principles upon which Christianity draws into family leadership, who is sovereign. These are very, very strong principles that are then built into how you govern and who is the governor in respect and relationship to the governed, and the governed in respect and relationship to the governors. So with that, the Anti-Federalists were very, very clear that if we did not maintain our principles, if we did not maintain those virtues, if we did not maintain those core principles that came out of biblical reality, then all the vices, they were very, very clear. And even arguing during the Constitutional Convention, those that attended argued about the vices of humanity. The primary vices being that of power mongers, that of money interests, that of envy. So when we take and we look at what does that mean, and we start then bringing that into our modern times, you could almost say that, oh, okay, the Democrats, they're not evil communists, but they are power mongers. They are those that are in collusion and tied, even more, they are tied intimately with their lobbyists, their moneyed interests. Just a little diversion here for a second on that is that Kath and I watched a couple great videos from a Hillsdale College program that was done down in Florida. And the links are in the archives, or they were in your promo. And one of them was from an organization that has been looking at the national checkbook, the state checkbook, the local government checkbook as much as they can. They have accumulated gobs of data. And I have here at the bottom of the screen who that organization is and what their website is, so that you can go look at them at your leisure and determine for yourself and listen to the video that is also in your references for the program that is up at where? SamuelAdamsReturns.net is where the archive is, and in the references is that program that lecturer that I'm talking about in particular. But what we have is exactly what was even argued during the Constitutional Convention, in that the money interests are now controlling those that are elected to govern. And that isn't just at the national level. The tiebacks to that are all the way down and into the state level. And when the federal government then takes and establishes different laws and worse, bureaucratic regulations, then what happens is that the moneyed interests are the ones that, in fact, are running the country. So, what I found very interesting is that most of you who are in the workforce work about 2,080 hours a year. I think that's what the math comes out to for 40 hours a week is 2,080 hours, something like that. 2080 is how we used to always figure it out. Well, Congress only works about 800 and change per year. That's all they actually work. The rest of the time, they're out there campaigning and all of that. I know people say that. When Congress is not in session, no damage is being done. Well, that's absolutely true, but that does not mean that the staffers are not still working. The staffers are still colluding with all the other money interests. They're colluding with all of the lobbyists, and the lobbyists are writing the bills for the staffers because the staffers, well, they're just not smart enough to really do that stuff, are they? At least when you look at the bill. So here's what we have real time in all of this greed, power, and all of this incestuousness with the moneyed interest. How do congressmen become millionaires? Donald Trump is now looking at what was released by the bill from Nancy Pelosi to take and fight the so-called coronavirus, and they have loaded that thing with stuff that they have not been able to get approved in 25 years. So now they are using something that is being hyped by the media, causing panics in people that are stupid. And now they're trying to push an agenda even more so because they think that they hold the purse strings and to get all of the money that the president needs, or they are pushing, because remember, he only asked for $2 billion and they're pushing it for $8 billion, but they are now tying all of these other strings to it. Well, as we come back into the second and the third segment, we're going to discuss a little bit more on the independent prerogative of the chief executive, and that is to apply a negative to any type of bill. But there's also other interesting pieces that happened during that debate of 87, especially we'll focus on June's, I think, 2nd and 3rd and 4th, somewhere in that time frame. I'll give you the specifics when we get into the next segment, and we're going to talk about that. And honestly, I think Donald Trump was sitting there in that historical manner, and he was listening in to a number of what was being said, the number of points that were being said during that convention. Between this, what we'll talk about here shortly, and George Washington's farewell address, I see that's how Donald Trump is operating. He's operating whether he knows those articles, documents, debates, that he's read them, studied them, I don't know. But he has that real American DNA that I've talked about for the last 30 years. And he's gotten that which Sam Adams has. And he understands that which the anti-federalist clearly understood So come on back in the next segment. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they absolutely got it right. This is Tom Navulis, your host, and I am delighted that you're here, and I am delighted that you're listening to Liberty Works Radio Network and that you are a regular listener. I'm glad that you're also on a number of those other networks that have picked up the podcast, and I'm very delighted that you are listening there. But as the primary network, which has always been faithful to me at Liberty Works Radio Network, I suggest that you take in, get on there, look around, check out those other hosts and hostesses. And as I always ask, please find that donate button and contribute. It's a listener-funded network, so jump in there and contribute, and we will continue to bring you those mirrors in history. So as I left off in the last segment is that we are now at another quandary. And as Kathy and I were talking at the break, it is once again where the demons are taking and trying to box Donald Trump in. He knows that he needs some additional funding and he needs relief for the economic components of the hype, it's not a pandemic, it is a panic that is being put on by the Democrats and the news, the fake news. Well, not even the fake news. There's others out there that could be on Fox News that are saying things are worse than what they are. Let's remember that here we have this run on toilet paper, and this is not an intestinal flu. This is an upper respiratory virus, and therefore, taking and hoarding toilet paper isn't going to do you any good. We saw a good picture here that I'll take and oh, there it is. It's back behind me right now. Is the picture of the safe room that these folks were able to finally put together. I thought that was really good, that now you're safe. You can take and ensure that you will have enough to cover yourself without anything escaping. But when we look at these things, you have to sit there and you go, come on, be real. How about being adults? How about being responsible adults? But, oh, wait a minute, in a nanny state, there's no such thing as an adult. You have to have the government take care of you. So that's what we're seeing once again with that bill that came out of the House Demons last night. And remember, 11 o'clock at night. My mother used to always say that, when you hit that midnight or close to it, or in the middle of the night, which 11 o'clock begins the middle of the night, if you will, is that's the devil's playground. And sure enough, we got the demons out there doing their dirty work, and that's the devil's playground. Well, Mom was right. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So we're also looking at all of this, and what's the potentials? The potentials of what we've seen coming out of the Democrats, what we've seen in various departments within the bureaucratic state, within the administrative state, was that of trying to overthrow the president, to overthrow basically the U.S. government and impose a power elite. And this is what our founders were afraid of. This is some things that they even discussed during the debate on what would happen, not just by taking and having a president that would have a potential, a single executive, as we're going to talk about, that would have the potential to become a tyrant or a king, but even within the context of the legislatures And the Senate, as well as the House, which is this emotional group of people, is the whole idea that they could become tyrannical. And that's why we needed the checks and balances that would be put into place in such a manner that then the executive, independent of the judiciary, would have a negative. In other words, ultimately, the term of a veto is what was inserted into the Constitution as one of the powers of the president, and that it could be overridden with a 2/3 vote of the legislature. Now, this gets into the complexity, and stepping back for a moment, I think as I was mentioning in the first segment, is this idea of sedition. So what we are seeing now is that I would call the Democrats in the House seditious. Now, according to the definitions of sedition and according to how Congress is allowed to function and operate, that is not a legal description of what they're doing. But when they walk off out of the halls of the Capitol, and when we have the bureaucracies, the administrative state, that clearly comes into, in my mind, what was going on is sedition. And I know sedition has a bad rap because of the Sedition Act of 1798 and what happened with, old John Adams, Sam's cousin. And it's very, very sad what was going on from that political view. But you got to think about it for a minute. Some of the pieces there that were difficult to deal with were what was it going to take to become a naturalized citizen? So gosh, now we're dealing with all these illegals. And now we're having a bill go through where the Democrats want to open the borders all the way up. Well, we know President Trump, if it makes it through the Senate, President Trump will veto that. Then we have all of these others in the media. It made it illegal, a sweeping language in this act, which I don't believe that the act was all that smart the way they did it, made it illegal, among other actions, to write, print, utter, or publish any false, scandalous, and malicious writings with the intent to defame the government or to stir up sedition within the United States. Wow. You need to have the freedom of the press, but boy, we should get down to intent. So when we go to the 18 U.S. Code 2384, seditious conspiracy, if two or more persons in any state or territory or in any place subject to the jurisdiction of the United States conspire to overthrow, put down, or to destroy by force the government of the United States, or to levy war against them, or to oppose by force the authority thereof, or by force to prevent, hinder, or delay the execution of any law of the United States, or by force to seize, take, or possess any property of the United States contrary to the authority thereof, they shall each be fined under the title or imprisoned not more than 20 years or both. So, all right, I give in. Sedition to me is that we have all of these people in the FBI, in the intelligence community, in the Congress, trying to oppose, throw down, and prevent or hinder, delay the execution of laws of the United States, and so on. Okay, I give in. They didn't do it by force. What they did it by was using the methods and laws of the United States itself. You see, this goes back to the Kozak plan. This goes exactly what I've been telling you for years about the Kozak plan, in that we now have sufficient numbers of power mongers, socialists, communists, and flat out greedy, envious people in Congress that they do not give a flying rip. Can you fly a rip? Oh, no, that's a flying rip cord. Anyway, they don't care about the constituents, is the bottom line. They care about that centralized power. That's what the anti-federalists always warned us about, was the centralization of power. And to the extent the states have given into that and willingly participate in it for some of their share of the pocketbook. Sedition, okay, technically, we can't call it that because, you know what? There's not force that's being there. There's not something that is, put into place that way. But, it is in effect the use and methods of our existing constitutional design that the Anti-Federalists, again, said could come back and bite us in the noodle. So we have to think about that. Well, where does that leave us with the executive and the executive power? Well, one of the things that the Federalists wanted and that they argued strongly for during the convention was to have a strong executive. Someone that could stand up to the heat, someone that could take and fight for what was right and ensure that the laws were implemented in a correct manner, someone that would have integrity, that would take and bring the values of the populace forward, that would understand how to administer a large entity and organization across the many miles and ultimately the millions of people. Not that he was supposed to be a king, because the states were supposed to return or remain independent to a degree and retain many of their rights, which we've seen those chipped away at over and over and over again by both different laws as well as what we saw in Supreme Court rulings over the years. So we needed a strong executive to return the power to the people and not keep it centralized inside of the Beltway, as they call it now. It was always a swamp. If you remember your geography, is that portion of Maryland and Virginia right there. That portion of Maryland and Virginia is actually a swamp, and that's why they built on the hills first. So, it is. It's a belted swamp, and things don't get out of it. But we do have, yes, we have a champion there right now in Donald Trump that understands it. And when we get into the next segment, we are going to talk about Ben Franklin a little bit more. And actually, not a little bit more. We're going to talk about Ben Franklin. We're going to talk about that speech that he asked to be read in reference to the chief executive. You see, let me set it up a little bit. They were going through in the debate, and they're trying to talk about the powers of the president and the election and then compensation. And the argument was, well, we don't want the president to get rich. We don't want him to make money. We don't want anybody in the federal government to make money. We don't want them to get wealthy off of being in that position. And so the idea was, if you pay people, you know what, they're not going to take and try and utilize the all of those other folks out there that want to pay them through their families and all that other stuff. So the intent was that, okay, maybe we should pay the executive as well. There were several people that argued no, the executive should not be paid. In fact, even the senators should not be paid. But that's a story that we're going to pick up now in the third segment, because Sam Adams had a very strong opinion on what that all should look like, as well as did those anti-federalists. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this third segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they did, come on, you know it, let's say it all together, they got it right. Okay, so true. Hey, you folks down there in Lima, Ohio, come on and back, and welcome back. And everyone that is on Soaring Eagle Radio, so delighted that you are here. And thanks to those folks down there for having me aboard. I sure do appreciate that. So we are taking and we're looking at none other than Saturday, but June 2nd, 1787. June 2nd, 1787. And what we have going on here is a discussion, and it was picked up again just before the break, that we're going to talk about what's going on with the president. And this is in the committee of the whole. And as you may be aware, I'm not going to get into all the details of how that was structured so that they can have independent and free conversations and how it would or would not be recorded. And these are all out of Madison's notes. And the real initial session was about the mode of appointing ye executive, and it was resumed from the previous day. The whole idea was, it doesn't need to be a popular vote, because that means that then they knew that the large states would be the ones that would end up electing or promoting who the president would be. So how do you make it equitable across all of the states? And one of the other arguments in here, and basically understanding that, is that even though you have to remember that during our founding era, over 90% of the people could read. A lot less than today. We have a real problem, as Jim McNeil brought out last week, when it comes even to the function of libraries and illiteracy in America, where we had a very illiterate people in America during the founding era. And they read the newspapers and they would get information, but everything was associated by timing. They didn't have the internet as we have today. And even with that, as we are seeing, and we talked about a little bit in the last segment around sedition, is that the fake news will not give you the real news, and that those that run for office are most often liars, deceivers, and have fallen off the reality of being a moral and virtuous people, or candidate even. Interesting. So the argument was, okay, how do we do this? What is it? How should we get people? They need to be coming from persons that are qualified to vote. And what needs to happen is that the states need to be divided into districts, that the persons qualified to vote in each of those districts will elect members. And they could be, initially, the argument was members of the legislature, and the legislature would then elect members, and we would have these electors. The electors would then take and go through those candidates and are supposed to vet the candidates and determine who is the most qualified to be the president of the United States. Well, all that went down the toilet when we went to a two-party system. We do very little vetting. What we do is a lot of promoting. And it's promoting those. And as we're watching once again with the Democrat Party, is that we're seeing that they have their kingmakers within that. And thankfully, the socialists, well, actually, Bernie's a Marxist. He's a weak Marxist. He's not the revolutionary Marxist that worked for him, but he is a Marxist. That they are deferring away from the Marxist to the socialist, which is Mr. whacked out Biden. That guy's got some problems. Anyway, the whole process of what that would mean came through, and it was going through all of those arguments, and then it got to a point of compensation when they really even didn't get to the total decision as to how that would be for an election. But Mr. Franklin, he got up and he moved that in reference to compensation, that that whole discussion should be postponed in order that he would be able to take and write down his thoughts. Because of his age, he just didn't want to come off the top of his head. He wanted to be able to formulate those thoughts. And in fact, the committee accepted that and allowed him to take and reduce all of those thoughts to writing. So this is where I see Donald Trump sitting in and listening. And I have here as if Dr. Franklin himself was speaking and promoting this and the intent. But here's what then Mr. Wilson read from Dr. Franklin. And yes, sir, it is with reluctance that I rise to express a disapprobation of any one article of the plan for which we are so much obliged to the honorable gentlemen who have laid it before us. From its first reading, I have borne a good will to it, and in general wished its success. In this particular of salaries to the executive branch, I happen to differ. And as my opinion may appear new and chimerical, it is only from a persuasion that it is right, and from a sense of duty that I hazard it. The committee will judge of my reasons when they have heard them, and their judgment may possibly change mine. I think I see inconveniences in the appointment of salaries. I see none in refusing them, but on the contrary, great advantages. Sir, there are two passions which have a powerful influence on the affairs of men. These are ambition and avarice, the love of power, and the love of money. Separately, each of these has great force in prompting men to action, but when united in view of the same object, they have in many minds the most violent effects. Place before the eyes of such men a post of honor that shall be at the same time a place of profit, and they will move heaven and earth to obtain it. The vast number of such places it is that renders the British government so tempestuous. The struggle for them are the true sources of all those factions which are perpetually dividing the nation, distracting its councils, hurrying sometimes into fruitlessness and mischievous wars, and often compelling a submission to dishonorable terms of peace. And of what kind are the men that will strive for this profitable preeminence? Through all the bustle of cabal, the heat of contention, the infinite mutual abuse of parties, tearing to pieces the best of characters? It will not be the wise and moderate, the lovers of peace and good order, the men fittest for trust. It will be the bold and the violent, the men of strong passions and indefatigable activity in their selfish pursuits. These will thrust themselves into your government and be your rulers. And these too will be mistaken in their expected happiness of their situation, for their vanquished competitors of the same spirit and from the same motives will perpetually be endeavoring to distress their administration, thwart their measures, and render them odious to the people. Besides these evils, sir, though we may set out in the beginning with moderate salaries, we shall find that such will not be of long continuance. I'm going to stop there for time's sake. But just that first paragraph, I think it's important to understand and go through that first paragraph, because I think, once again, not that Ben Franklin was an anti-federalist, quite to the contrary. Ben Franklin was the one that actually pushed the Constitution forward, saying that it's the best that human beings are going to be able to do. We got to move forward with this. But when we look at all of those faults, those ambitions and avarice, the love of power and the love of money, and then how he describes the people that would move heaven and earth to get it. Wow. Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, the Democrats to retain that power. And I think the one that just captured me the most. So here you have this guy, and he talks about it in the second paragraph, in the third paragraph here that you're going to have to go read for yourself. But he talks about, even with George Washington, he had the capacity, he had the virtue, he had the morality, he had everything that could be that first great magistrate. And he ended up being exactly that. But it was at no salary. The salary, remember, that George Washington took for being the general that won the day, George Washington's salary, here it is, folks. Look on the video. A big, fat zero. George Washington did not take a salary to be the general that won the Revolutionary War. He didn't even want to take the salary to be a president. So here we have Donald Trump not taking a salary. Donald Trump doesn't need the power. Donald Trump doesn't need the money. Donald Trump doesn't have to have the ambition. He doesn't have to display avarice. He doesn't need power. Donald Trump wants to serve his country. But let's go to that last sentence. That last sentence, in talking about all of those who were bold and violent, the men of strong passions and indefatigable activity in their selfish pursuits, every Democrat and some of the Republicans, mittens, for their vanquished competitors, which they are of the same spirit, that means all of them, and from the same motives, they will perpetually be endeavoring to distress the Trump administration, thwart its measures, and render it odious to the people. And the power of the media, the power of all of the establishment, the administrative state, all of the swamp monsters, all of the lobbyists, all of the billions of dollars in those mega $1,000,000 homes all around Virginia and Maryland that are encompassed in the Beltway. Yeah. They want to stop we, the people, from once again retaining what is ours. What is it? Liberty. So instead, they use fear-mongering. They use the virus. They use the legislative abilities to take and impeach a president that is trying to do the right thing, that doesn't even need any of this. They're taking and trying to encompass within a bill to help the nation everything that they've been wanting for the last 25 years, to try and put this on the head of a president and make it look like he's the one that will be at fault if this does not get signed. Wow. That's why Sam Adams really believed that the states needed to have more power. But, we have wimps like we have here in Ohio who capitulate to all sorts of different insanities and fear-mongering in and amongst themselves. I know many of you have that same in your states. What do? You got to get out there and fight. You have to understand these things. You have to pray before the living God so that he would go forth ahead of us and he would win the day. Because that's what Sam Adams did. He prayed and he knew that the Anti-Federalists had it right.